In 2007, Nokia controlled 50% of the global smartphone market. Apple had just shipped the first iPhone. Google's Android didn't exist yet. Nokia had 130,000 employees, a research budget larger than Apple's entire revenue. By 2013, Nokia's phone division was sold to Microsoft for 5.4 billion euros. 6 years, 50% of the market to zero. This is not a story about disruption. This is a story about what happened in the building. The version you've heard before goes like this. Apple invented the touchscreen smartphone. Nokia was too slow to react. The end. That version is wrong. Nokia shipped the N95 in 2006, 1 year before the first iPhone. It had GPS, a 5-megapixel camera, internet access, a media player. It was, by almost every technical measure, a more capable device than the original iPhone. Nokia was not caught off guard by technology. Nokia was caught off guard by itself. Researchers at INSEAD and Aalto University spent 3 years interviewing 76 Nokia executives, middle managers, and engineers after the collapse. What they found was not a story about a company that missed the future. It was a story about a company where the people who could see the future were afraid to say so out loud. And the people at the top were getting information that had already been filtered, softened, and adjusted before it reached them. What I'm going to walk you through is built from 3 sources. The INSEAD research study, published in the Academy of Management Journal in 2015. The leaked internal memo from Nokia's CEO, dated February 2011. And the documented boardroom decisions that are now part of the public record. This is not speculation. This is what was said, what was decided, and what it cost. Let's start where the collapse actually started. Not in 2011, not in 2007. In the late 1990s, Nokia grew at a pace that almost no company had ever matched. Between 1996 and 2000, headcount at Nokia's mobile division grew 150%. Revenue grew 503% in the same period. To manage that growth, Nokia built systems, processes, hierarchy. Managers were put under relentless short-term performance pressure. Targets were set, results were expected, and the culture that grew around those expectations became something specific. It became a culture where you did not tell your boss bad news. The INSEAD researchers documented this in detail. One middle manager described being in a meeting where data was presented on a chart. The supervisor looked at the chart and told the team to move the data points to the right, not to fix the underlying performance, to move the points on the chart, because the supervisor was taking that chart to a more senior meeting, and the numbers needed to look better. This was not one incident. The researchers found this pattern repeated across multiple levels of management. One middle manager told them directly, the information did not flow upwards. Top management was, in his words, directly lied to. In any organization, the most dangerous moment is not when bad news arrives. It is when the culture makes reporting bad news career-ending. If you work in a large company and you have never heard a difficult truth in a management meeting, that is the warning sign. Silence at the top does not mean everything is fine. It means people have stopped telling you. So by the time the iPhone arrived, Nokia's leadership was already operating on filtered information. They were making decisions based on data that had been optimized to look acceptable, rather than data that was accurate. The first problem wasn't the iPhone, it was the PowerPoint. By 2007, Nokia's engineers knew that Symbian was dying. Not a gradual decline, a structural problem. Symbian had been built for hardware keypads, not touchscreens, not apps, not ecosystems. Developing for Symbian was notoriously difficult. Developers described it as painful, outdated, and hostile to outside innovation. Nokia had an alternative in development. It was called Mego, a next-generation operating system, modern, touch-native, capable. Engineers inside Nokia believed Mego could compete with iOS, but Mego was slow, delayed, and the pressure to ship devices on the existing Symbian platform was overwhelming every quarter. So Nokia kept shipping Symbian phones, quarter after quarter, not because anyone believed Symbian was the answer, but because stopping meant missing revenue targets, and missing revenue targets meant your career was at risk. This is what the INSEAD researchers called the fear-based consensus. Managers knew the platform was burning. They kept pouring resources into it anyway, because the system had made honesty more dangerous than failure. The most expensive decisions companies make are not the dramatic ones, they are the quiet ones, where everyone in the room knows something isn't working, and nobody says it because the culture has made silence the safer career choice. The cost of that silence at Nokia was 40% market share. On the morning of February 8, 2011, a technology blog called Engadget published a document. It was an internal memo from Nokia's CEO, Stephen Elop. It had been written for Nokia's employees. It was never supposed to be public. The memo opened with a story about a man standing on a burning oil platform in the North Sea. Faced with certain death from the flames, the man jumped 30 meters into the freezing water below. Against all odds, he survived. And when asked why he jumped, he said, "Because I had no choice." Elop's message to Nokia's 130,000 employees was simple. We are standing on a burning platform. Our platform is burning. The memo was extraordinary in its honesty. Elop named the iPhone, named Android, named Chinese manufacturers eating Nokia's low-end market. He admitted Nokia had missed the iPhone by 4 years and was still not close to matching it. He admitted the developer ecosystem for Symbian was dying, while iOS and Android thrived. Nokia's board of directors read the same memo the rest of the world read, on Engadget. Chairman Jorma Ollila described his reaction at the subsequent board meeting as bitter. The burning platform memo is studied in business schools as an example of radical internal honesty. But the lesson is more specific than that. Elop was honest with the public. He had inherited a culture where honesty upward was suppressed. The memo broke the silence, but it broke it in the wrong direction. Real organizational honesty flows up before it flows out. 3 days after the memo leaked, on February 11, 2011, Elop stood at a press conference in London. He quoted Winston Churchill. He announced Nokia's new strategy. Nokia would abandon Symbian. Nokia would abandon Mego. Nokia's smartphone future would run on Microsoft's Windows Phone. The market responded immediately. Between January 2011 and January 2012, Nokia's market capitalization fell 50%. The reaction inside Nokia was just as stark. Developers who had been working on Android-compatible Nokia projects had their work canceled. Engineers working on Mego, the system that many believed could still compete, were told the project was over. Only one Mego device ever shipped, the Nokia N9, released in 2011, widely praised by reviewers, immediately discontinued by Nokia's own leadership. Elop's former employer was Microsoft. Some inside Nokia believed the decision had been made before Elop arrived. The INSEAD researchers documented a specific dynamic. Because Nokia's CEO had previously worked at Microsoft, some managers assumed the decision was already made and stopped arguing for alternatives. Not because they agreed, because disagreeing felt pointless and dangerous. The choice between Android and Windows Phone was not purely strategic. It was filtered through a culture where challenging the CEO's perceived preference was career-ending. The engineers who might have argued hardest for Android had already learned that argument was futile. The culture of fear that began in the 1990s produced the wrong strategic decision in 2011. Those two things are the same story. By 2013, Nokia sold its phone division to Microsoft for 5.4 billion euros. At its peak, Nokia's mobile phone business had been valued at over 100 billion euros. Microsoft wrote off 5.7 billion euros on the acquisition in 2015 and shut the division down. In 2011, Nokia employed 130,000 people. By 2013, that number was 86,000, tens of thousands of jobs, communities in Finland and across the world, gone. The former CEO, Olli-Pekka Kallasvuo, who was replaced in 2010, was asked what went wrong. His successor, Stephen Elop, summarized the tragedy in one sentence that became infamous. He said, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." That sentence is the most expensive sentence in corporate history, because the whole point of this story is that they did do something wrong. They built a culture where the truth couldn't travel upward fast enough to save them. Let's come back to where we started. In 2007, Nokia controlled 50% of the global smartphone market. They had engineers who could see the future. They had a next-generation operating system ready to build. They had a research budget that dwarfed Apple's entire company. What they didn't have was a building where people could say what they actually knew. The iPhone didn't kill Nokia. The performance review system killed Nokia. The fear of missing a quarterly target killed Nokia. The culture where moving the data point on the chart was safer than reporting the real number, that killed Nokia. Nokia's patent portfolio still generates over $600 million a year from Apple and Samsung. They had the technology. They always had the technology. Next week, we go inside the meeting where Blockbuster's board was shown Netflix and voted no. Twice. Subscribe. The next meeting is worse.